Welcome to the Mindful Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Before we get into your fabulous book, What's Going Right, I am curious, have you had many stand-up comics sitting on the couch? And have we actually been just keeping you in business over the last 30 years?
It's possible I've ran across a comedian or two. As we're sort of saying, I think it requires a lot of insight to be a comedian, and that insight can sometimes weigh on a person. So yeah, I've seen a comedian or two across the years.
Yeah, it's one of those questions that I get asked a lot is, why do you do it? What is that drive? And how come so many stand-up comedians in particular have issues with anxiety and depression? I'm never quite sure how to answer the question. I think it's multifaceted. I think there's many different reasons why people want to jump up on stage in front of people. Have you any insights on that, that question? Why do comedians do it, and why do they suffer so much as a result of the job that they say they love, but that's slowly killing them?
Well, I can't say for sure, but I think we're talking about introverts with a lot of insight. And I think then a person who has the kind of insight comedians often do wants to express that and share that, because the comedian's seeing things in the world around us that are not okay, or not the way they should be for health and happiness, and then feels is moved inside to communicate that to others. But then you have an introverted person who then is doing extroverted things. So that'd be my best guess as to why.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because when I say I would consider myself to be an introvert, even though all my work for the last 30 years, or certainly 20 years, has been very outward looking and performance orientated. Yes. But I would still consider myself to be more of an introvert than an extrovert. But I think people are surprised by that when you say to them, it usually comes up on a golf course, because somebody says, "You're not as funny as I thought you'd be." You're like, well, I'm playing golf now. This is my quiet inward time where I just want to beat myself up in my head. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And I think if you see someone who really, really clearly looks like an extrovert, that person might be an extrovert. It's just a good thing to keep in mind, because they're introverted people who put themselves in the world in an extroverted way, but it creates a lot of discomfort. So we can't judge someone from the outside. Often when people appear to be introverted, not always, but often they are, when people appear to be extroverted, it's unclear what they're feeling inside.
Anyway, thank you for that little diversion at the start of our conversation.
Yeah.
Congratulations on your book, What's Going Right. Thank you for joining us across the time zones. Really appreciate it. I know my listeners and viewers do. Would you say, I love the title of your book. I love the message. It's positive. It's hopeful. It reminds us that we're doing far more right than maybe we give ourselves credit for. Do you think that the wellness world, particularly mental health world, is unnecessarily negative in its approach?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I don't think there is necessarily a mental health wellness world. There's certainly people who are interested in, of course, how can we better our mental health? But the field that I work in has not exercised leadership and say, look, we want to characterize mental health in a way that takes science and expertise and knowledge and frames for people how to understand themselves. So the field is always looking for what's wrong. There's a very, very thick book, right, the DSM, that has enough diagnoses. There could be a half dozen for each of us in the book. It's looking for what's going wrong, as opposed to saying, well, how do we understand people? So the whole framing is consistent with the stigma that mental health has suffered across the years. It doesn't look at mental health and say, hey, we can have a parallel to physical health here. If someone shows up at a physician's office and says, I want to be healthier, the person maybe has diabetes, or they're overweight, or they have high cholesterol, right? We can say, okay, clearly much more is going right in that person than is going wrong, right? Or they wouldn't be alive, right? They're presenting with a lot of things going right. And we can say, okay, within all of that, here's how you might adjust diet or exercise, for example. But we don't do that with mental health and say, hey, there's a way of understanding ourselves and looking from the perspective of what's going right in us that's real and true and scientifically driven. And from there, we can look at our issues or problems. It's not a Pollyanna view of things, right? It's saying, let's look at things for real, how they really are, and make that parallel of physical health to mental health. So now we start feeling empowered to understand ourselves and build good mental health.
You mentioned the physical analogy there of when we are approaching something with our physical bodies. I like how you talk about how we tend to approach our mental challenges, our emotional challenges, that maybe we'll try one thing, it doesn't work, and we give up. And I talk me through the analogy you use of going to the gym and just doing one exercise, because I that popped out at me first early on in your book, and it really connected.
Yeah. So human beings want to understand, right? We feel so empowered by knowledge and understanding. And if we don't have it, we're confused. And often confusion comes along with fear and anxiety, right? So then it's kind of a shot in the dark, and someone tries something and that thing doesn't work, right, for them. And it's very easy then to get down and to feel very negative. Oh, nothing's going to help me, right? But if we don't have like an explanatory framing, then we are not going to be able to avoid that. If someone is going to the gym for their physical health, there's an understanding that, the cardiovascular, this kind of exercise, doing cardio helps our blood vessels. It helps our heart. We know that. If someone's smoking and they stop smoking, it's good for the lungs, right? If we're working out, it's great for the muscles. We understand, so we don't want to just go to the gym and do one exercise. We have an understanding of what's going on inside of us and how we make it all better and how we can use the gym to do that. Right? We need the same thing for mental health. So we're not just trying one thing, because if you want to have more endurance and you go to the gym and you're just working on biceps, right? Maybe even biceps on one side, right? We say like, that's not going to go well. And it's then easy to feel down about it because there's no explanatory framework that says, hey, here's how you go to the gym and get healthier. So we do have that for physical health. We don't have it for mental health. So things seem to be a shot in the dark in the context of confusion and anxiety. And then also the stigma of mental health. And it absolutely does not have to be that way.
You're so good in your book at having those Me Too moments, or that's me moments. When you recognize yourself and what you're talking about. And I definitely am. I'm excited for listeners to see themselves in what you call the 3 drives. And I want to get to that in a moment. But I'm always fascinated by our own journeys into these spaces of work. I never thought I would be in this space. My journey started about 20 years ago with a big panic attack on the way to a comedy festival. It sort of set me in a new trajectory. I know your own journey into this space began many years ago, and you've had your own challenges. Can you talk to me and us, my listeners, about your wonderful brother, Jonathan?
Yeah. Well, my youngest brother, Jonathan, died by suicide in 1994, which was devastating within our family system, and I had a response to that, which is typical. It's what happens in human beings if we don't understand. We have a reflex of guilt and shame. So if we bring very big traumas, they come to us, that we have a human reflex of guilt and shame, and unless we work through that, we feel guilty and ashamed. I felt that it was my fault. I felt that it showed all these awful things about our family and our family system. I was just responding to what the society around me kind of projects. I had taken it inside, and I didn't realize that there's a reflex to feel guilty, and that I could stop and I could think about that and say, what really happened here? Can I step back from it and see something that was so tragic, but see it through the lens of what's real, not see it through the lens of, oh my God, it's my fault. What did I do? Right? Or what didn't I do? And this is very common because traumas are so common for us as human beings. And I don't mean here trauma is like, oh, everything that goes negative for a person, everything that doesn't go right, now we have a trauma, right? The idea that trauma is it's real and it changes us inside is validated by modern neuroscience, which shows if our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, then we have brain changes in response to that. So because traumas, either acute traumas, the loss of a person, an accident, an injury, chronic traumas, being seen as less than across time is just one example, or even vicarious traumas, being so involved in someone else's trauma or what we're seeing in the world around us, what we're seeing through the news, can overwhelm us and make brain changes. And these brain changes make us really different in ways that are shared across humans, right? That's why what's going right applies to humans, because we react in the same way. Just like we all have heart, lungs, muscles, like that's true of us physically. The same things are going on inside of us in terms of our mental health. So that's why I can relate so strongly. It doesn't have to be the same trauma, right? But we have traumas that change us, and we can relate to that as human beings. And I think it's part of what's really helped me relate is to see that like this is about us. Like the trauma and the changes and all of this is about us, meaning it's all about human beings.
Mm. Do you think from the work that you eventually got into and the work that you do now as a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, do you think that allowed you to have a lot more sympathy for that younger version of you that was really hard on himself, trying to deal with the loss of your brother?
I think so. I think it's the knowledge and really the experience of just being in the world and working with people who are suffering in one way or another has been very, very helpful. At the time, I did need some basic psychotherapy in order to understand like why my life was going so much worse after the loss of my brother, why my relationships were going downhill, my self-care was going downhill. I needed someone to help me understand that. And it wasn't that, I think, that difficult. I think that the therapist who did 10 sessions with me through my insurance of like, hey, let me help you understand, was immensely helpful, because she was just telling me about things like, hey, this is why it makes sense that you're responding this way. It makes sense that you feel this way. Because why am I wrecking my own life after the loss of my brother? It's not helping me. It's not helping me help my parents or anyone else around me. So then a person starts to think, what's wrong with me? Right? And then we start to think there's really something wrong with me, or like I'm crazy, or I can never be healthy. And then this gets into our minds, and I needed someone to normalize, for me to give me some information so that I could understand that what was happening to me makes sense. And from there, I could start to do something with it. So I really, really needed that at the time, and that's often what human beings need after an acute trauma. But then, yes, learning more across time has been very, very helpful for me to really put a framing around what happened, why it happened, how it happened, the aftermath of it. It's been very helpful to just be in the world with other people suffering to learn and understand better.
Mm. You say your book is anti-cynical. What do you mean by that?
Well, in a world of mental health that wants to say, what's wrong with you? Okay, if you're sitting in front of me, I got this big book in my head and I'm looking for what numbers I can give you, right? How is that not going to push us towards cynicism, towards framing us through what is wrong with me or what is wrong with you, right? This is a very cynical approach to the world around us, as opposed to an approach that has a foundation of understanding. So if there's something going on in me that I'm not happy with, right, I can see it through, okay, there's a lot that's going right in me, right? Psychologically, in my brain, medically, right? There's a lot that's going right. And if I can understand that, and within that framework, look for what is not the way I want it to be, what's wrong within this broader framework, I can go fix that. And I feel empowered to fix that. I don't feel afraid to look inside. And what it creates in us is compassionate curiosity about ourselves. And this is very often what we don't have in us. We feel ashamed of what our mental health problems are. We feel afraid of our mental health problems. We often feel blaming of ourselves and others. And that's going to push towards cynicism as opposed to understanding what's going on in a bigger way, in a foundational way, so that we can look at what's real in us and we can approach it with curiosity without coming through a lens of shame or blame.
I like your car analogy that runs through the book. And I guess obviously it's connected to the three drives that we're going to get to now. But, I think most of us, when we're confused about our own brains and our own attitude to ourselves and things that, if we're going through a period of mental difficulty and that we don't understand, when you use a car analogy, people get it, and I think that's one of the beautiful things of the book. It's just like, oh yeah, if you brought your car to the garage and there was a couple of things wrong with it, the mechanic wouldn't come out and say, that's it, we're just going to label your car now. And that's pretty much the way your car is going to be for the rest of its life. It's a wreck.
Right.
You're just going to have to make do. We'd be far more positive about our car and go, okay, let's look at the warning lights. Let's look at the signals. And then, see if we can fix where those issues are coming from. We wouldn't just write off our car based on a couple of warning lights that are coming up. But we often do that to ourselves, as you correctly point out. So let us dig into the three drives, because this sort of a lot of the flow of your book comes from this space. Can you explain them to us?
So what is going right in all of us, in every last one of us, is the generative drive. And historically, the field that I work in has framed us, human beings, as having two basic drives. That there are two things that are born into us just because we're humans. And one is aggression, and the other is pleasure. So that's how the field has generally come at mental health. And the thought is we need aggression in order to survive in the world, and we want pleasure. Now, that could mean really pleasurable things, like food, enjoyment, sex, like these are pleasurable things, but it extends also to the pleasure of feeling safe, of having a roof over our heads, of not having to be afraid all of the time. So that is part of pleasure. But the idea that if all we were aggression and we're seeking pleasure in some way or another, like there's no way we would still be here. There's no way human beings would still be here. And we wouldn't, for example, create art. We wouldn't do nice things for someone else with no clear benefit to ourselves. We wouldn't offer a hand up to someone who's down, really or metaphorically. It doesn't explain at all human behavior. If we then shift, and the field has touched upon this but not embraced it. People across time have thought along these lines of it can't be that, there has to be something sitting over this, and that something is the generative drive that makes us want to be in the world in a way that makes the world a better place, makes our lives better, makes the world better for the people around us, eases the suffering of others, gives people more chance and opportunity, create something beautiful someone else can see. Right? When this drive is governing us, this is when we're on the pathway to health. And the drives of, I think, aggression doesn't make sense, right? It's too much. Not everyone is entering the world every day with aggression in us. How about assertion? Right? That we want to be assertive. We need to assert ourselves in the world around us. So if we say, hey, I have to assert myself in the world, and I want to find these things that are pleasurable, including safety and security. So I'm going to do those things. Those things are extremely important for human beings, but those things are going to nest underneath the generative drive, which is going right in me. It went right when sperm and egg came together, and now you have the start of a human being. This drive starts to develop in us that is expansive and forward-looking, and when that's governing us, we're in the driver's seat of our lives, right? So the car analogy would say, hey, a lot of times what happens is if something's going wrong with the car, I like your analogy. I take it even a step farther, saying, wait, the steering isn't working so great. I better hide it in the garage, or, I better not do anything about it, right? We hide away because we're confused and we're anxious. But if we see, hey, there's something real in all of us, the generative drive is real, then it's so much easier to approach ourselves through the lens of compassionate curiosity and go figure things out and not feel afraid of figuring things out. We don't have to feel afraid when we take the car to the mechanic. We're going to learn something. We're going to make decisions. Like, it's going to be okay. We need to be able to do that about ourselves. And if we understand that there's a way to understand ourselves, just like there is our physical health, and that we can bring these drives into balance with the generative drive governing all in the driver's seat of our lives, now we're off to the races of making life better. And we don't have to feel afraid if I think, gosh, what's going on with me that my mood is lower, or what's going on with me that my last 5 relationships really weren't okay, all in the same way, or what's going on in me that I had a panic attack or that I can't sleep. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, I have to hide that away, we think, well, let me think about that. Right? Let me think about that. Why is it that I can't shine the light of day on that so that I can figure it out? Because I don't want to have a panic attack. I don't want to have relationships that are negative in the same way. I want to understand it so that it all can change. Now we've just shifted everything 180 degrees.
So we have our assertive drive, we have our pleasure drive, and we have our generative drive. How might those manifest in our lives, just to give people a sense of where those are popping up?
Right. So the assertion drive and the pleasure drive have to be in balance. Right. And people have different ranges, right, where they can reside based upon all sorts of things, their genes, how they were raised, what they've done as adults. So what we want to be doing is we want to be functioning at the higher end of where our healthy range is. But if we function too high or too low, that's not good. So as an example, so how could too much assertion be bad? Well, too much assertion becomes over control. Right? When people become too assertive, they often are trying to control things that they can't. So a person may be trying to over control their family, or they may be trying to control things too much at work, and they're taking away from other people, or they're taking too much on and it's not going well. Or we can become aggressive because we're overly assertive. Now we're putting other people down so we can feel better about ourselves, right? So too much assertion is not good. Too little assertion is not good either. So someone who really would like things to be different, they want to go out and find a good relationship, but they can't get themselves up off the couch, right? They can't get themselves to go out, or they want a better job, but they're not responding to job ads. They're not having interviews, right? So too little assertion is not good either. We need to be in what's the optimal range for us, which differs by person. Let's look at that and then see how can we function on the higher end of it. And the same is true of pleasure. If we have too much pleasure drive, then we can be using pleasure to cover up for something else. So that pleasure could be drugs and alcohol is just one example, or doing something pleasurable to the exclusion of other things that we need to do. So, it may be enjoyable to watch television or scroll through the internet, but what I really need to be doing is cleaning my house, or what I need to be doing is work, right? So too much desire, pleasure, then we start using pleasure to make up for other things, and too little pleasure drive is not good either, because then we don't anticipate that anything is going to go well. I mean, talk about a link to cynicism of, well, why would I do that? It's just going to, the same thing is going to happen again. Why would I try and find a better job? Never works out for me. Or I have the same relationship. It's the same thing over and over again. I always come out on the short end. Right now, there's no anticipation of pleasure, and I'm accepting I'm just not going to have it in my life. So assertion and pleasure have to be in balance. And when are they in balance? When the things that sit underneath of them, the structure of self and the function of self, are in healthy places. And what sits above it, the generative drive, is in control. So here, the structure of self and the function of self would be, the parallel would be to heart, lungs, muscles, joints, right? To say, hey, they're things that we can understand about ourselves, and we want to put those things right. If things aren't going well in my physical health, and what's really driving that is a knee pain, right? Then I'd say, hey, let's go through my physical health. We could take a history. We could, I could be examined. We do labs. You think, okay, there's an issue here, or maybe I'm getting short of breath, right? We say, let's figure it out. We can do the same thing in our mental health so that we can identify if I have a knee pain, let's figure out why so that I don't have to have knee pain anymore. Then things can be back to where we want them to be. So the structure of self and the function of self are the parallel there. Then the drives sit above that, and the generative drive sits above all.
I couldn't help but think, certainly for me, and I would say most of my Irish listeners and viewers would be thinking, I think we all have or have had an issue with our pleasure drive, which may have been
Yes.
completely out of control at some point in our lives. Maybe we lean into pleasure a little bit more than we ought to. Um, and yeah, I guess, is that something, do you think, that changes? I get the sense from you talking that these drives are fluid. They're constantly changing, particularly as we move through life. I have
Sure.
a feeling that maybe in recent years, I'm in my early 50s now, eh,
Hmm.
that in recent years, by pretty much eliminating alcohol from my life and making a few positive changes, that maybe I've taken my foot off the accelerator of the pleasure drive a little bit and amplified my generative drive. Would that be a sign of those kinds of improvements, of that shift?
Oh, yeah, that makes absolute sense to me. When you said most of us have had a problem with the pleasure drive, I would argue that if it's not all of us, it's very, very close to all of us, because the problem isn't just on the higher end of seeking pleasure. That the quieter side is the other end, where there are people who don't seek pleasure. Their problem has not been, oh, if alcohol gives some release, they're drinking more than is healthy. But the problem has been they don't anticipate anything can go well. They're kind of shutting themselves away from life. So yes, we all are going to have issues with our assertion drive and our pleasure drive. We all are going to have issues with our structure of self and our function of self. Why? Because we're alive. And life continues to come at us, and stressors will continue to come at us. Stressors in our own lives, stressors in the world around us, right? All we have to do is we could just turn the news on now, and all it will give us problems immediately, right? With our drive, because we'll see new difficult things, new stressful things. Life is happening one moment after the next, and it is difficult to keep ourselves healthy. So just like I've not run across anyone in, all the years I've been a physician, here you say that person's been in perfect health from moment one. All right, that's not how it works, because life happens. And if we're engaged in life, right, then things are going to happen to us more, right? If we wanted to be as safe as we could be, we turn everything down and never open our front door. But then the assertion and pleasure drives are so low and we're miserable. If we're going to be out in life, life is going to happen and those drives are going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged. Our mental health is going to be challenged. So we have to work at it, just like we have to work at our physical health. I mean, so many good things have happened with physical health where there's a really broad awareness that says, like, we should eat in a healthy way, right? We should get enough sleep. We should get enough exercise. We should be in healthy weight ranges. We should have movement, in our joints. We have an idea of this, and we also have an idea that we need to be aware of that all the time. Doesn't mean we need to eat perfectly all the time, but we need to be aware that we want to have a healthy diet overall. If we could just apply the same thing to mental health, I think we would be infinitely healthier as a population, but we don't see it that way of like, hey, there are going to be challenges just because we're alive. Let's understand ourselves and have our physical health and our mental health in our view and be working on that and be aware of it from one day to the next. That's how we stay in balance physically and mentally, emotionally.
There's a phrase you mentioned a few moments ago, which I'd love you to expand on, because I think it's really important and can help us remove some of the roadblocks we put in our own way. Talk to me about compassionate self-inquiry, something that, generally speaking, we're not too good at.
Right. Right. If we identify within ourselves a mental health problem, whether we call it that or we put different words to it, the usual response is that we feel afraid, anxious, ashamed, we want to hide it away, what's wrong with me, we're critical about ourselves for having the problem. And like, that's not helpful. In fact, that is the opposite of helpful. So after the loss of my brother, and my own life was becoming less healthy, I could realize there are problems in me. I could recognize my mood was much lower. I was getting much less enjoyment. And even then, I could understand, like, I think I'm depressed and I think I'm drinking. I'm certainly drinking more than I was before. And like, this seems not to be helping. I could identify these things, but I felt afraid and ashamed of them. I felt afraid of being depressed, right? Because I didn't know. What does that mean? Am I going to be crazy? Can I ever get back to life? Like, how bad is this? Can I understand it? Can it ever be better? Same thing with alcohol, right? So that leads us to then not get help. But imagine that I would have been able to think at the time, like, look, something really bad has happened. Something really tragic has happened in my life. And I notice on the other side of it that there are these changes in me. Like, it's interesting, like my mood is lower and I'm not enjoying things. And I often just don't want to get out of bed and do something. Like, that's a real change in me. Huh. Like, and it came around at the time of this loss. Like, gosh, there's got to be something to do about that, right? Same thing with alcohol. Like, why might I be doing that, right? Am I compensating or trying to compensate for that? I'm feeling worse. So bringing compassionate curiosity is how we get help, right? Because then, even not knowing anything about mental health, like I knew nothing about mental health, I could have thought much earlier on, well, look, maybe I could go talk to my doctor about it. Right. And there are mental health people in the world. There are therapists, there's medicines. Like, maybe I could go understand, but I didn't do that. I didn't call the mental health number on the back of my insurance card until things were really not in a great place. And then I did it with a sense of shame. Like, I had to hide it away and dial the number. What about saying, look, there's something going on in my mental health, clearly. Like, what's that number? Let me go do that. Right? That's compassionate curiosity. And if we can stop looking at ourselves through the lens of, like, what is wrong with us, right? Which makes us feel afraid and ashamed and hide away. But we could look through, like, look, what's going right? There's a lot going right in me if I'm even thinking about this, right? And I have thoughts of, I want to make my life better. I want to understand that. So, let me get some help. Let me be curious about it. Let me have somebody else be curious, which doesn't always have to mean a professional. It can be a trusted friend or family member because sometimes it's not as obvious. It's not as clear. Like, it was clear the changes in me happened after my brother's death. Sometimes it isn't so clear, and we tend to really minimize things. I mean, how many times I've heard someone say they've been in a serious car accident. They go, no, it couldn't be that. Like, I wasn't badly hurt. But the person was terrified that they might die, right? Or afterwards, the person has thoughts of the accident, but it doesn't register that it would be that. Now, part of that is also because we're not really looking at it and saying, wow, like, that happened, and it's so clear to me I'm different on the other side of it. This will happen with physical assaults, sexual assaults, where it can be so clear, but the person is minimizing to themselves either from guilt or shame or the feeling that no one's going to help them or people are going to look down on them. So then we don't get to see what's really going on inside of us, and then we then go to a different place, which is a place of hiding away. But if we feel empowered, then we can just observe ourselves, and it might not be obvious. Maybe I don't know why seems like I've been doing worse, since the new year started. I might say, well, let me talk to someone hey, if you're a good friend of mine or, a partner, a family member, to say, I don't know, have you seen any change? Like, I felt kind of different. What person might say, yeah, I have seen you be different, but like this thing, happened. Like, it's about when you broke up with so-and-so. We can learn about ourselves, but if we're not curious and we're hiding it away, we're much more likely to be like I was, where, with shame, I call the insurance number on the back of my card to, like, maybe talk to somebody when I was months down the road of really being in an unhealthy place. And it's some of what we do. Some of what we do, what we see when we work with people. There are about 30 of us who work here, and we do a lot of intensive work with people. And very often, this is what we see: is I say we're in the business of empowerment. That what we're trying to do is just help someone find the compassionate curiosity in them, and then in a collaborative way, like, hey, let's look at it. And that's often the biggest change we see, where sometimes people will come to us. And they're coming to us in a way that they feel like this isn't going to be good, and people are going to look down on them, and they feel bad about themselves. And it's remarkable how fast that can change if you're met with, like, okay, clearly there are things that are going on that don't feel great. Like, that's why you're here. Like, hey, let's figure it out. We can figure it out and make it better. Right? It's just so different how quickly we change then.
I guess in a way, when we can get curious, particularly about any of our own behaviors or patterns, it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, that we're moving from a place of judgment into learning. Like, we're actually open to learn if we're curious. You know, if a kid is curious about nature, it'll be hoovering up information. But
Yes.
if we're beating the
Yes.
crap out of ourselves in our heads, it's really hard
Right.
to either A, learn new stuff, or B, change the behavior, because
Right.
it's like putting on really heavy boots. You know, those boots you see in science fiction movies where they're magnetized and you're kind of clumping along really slowly. You
Right.
might head in the right direction, but God, it's so much harder, isn't it, when we're beating ourselves up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we would never do this physically. We would never say, hey, my knee really, gosh, my knee really hurts. You know what I'll do is I'll just pound on it a bunch, right? Or, let me just smash it into the wall a couple times and see. But we will do that to ourselves, where someone will start to notice that something isn't going so well. Like they don't feel as good about themselves, and they're avoiding other people, and maybe the other people feel disappointed, in them because they're not as present. And what normally goes on in us of like, what the hell is wrong with me? Or, damn it, why can't I? That's the equivalent of just beating up on what's physically hurting. I don't know if this is true in Ireland, but sometimes you see something in society around us that's really capturing something deep, right? And I've started to see signs in some businesses sometimes that will say the beatings will not stop until morale improves. Right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that kind of thing that's so widespread now is reflecting what's really going on inside of us, that there is a way that we actually do feel that about ourselves. We're going to keep beating up on ourselves until we feel better. And it's just not how it works, right? We have to stop, and we have to feel empowered enough that, hey, there's a way I could understand myself and be healthier. Now let me bring some compassionate curiosity. Now morale can improve because the beatings have stopped. And I said to more people than I could count that, gosh, you're getting more depressed. Clearly, you can see it. I can see it. But ever since you started getting depressed, you've just kind of been more and more awful to yourself. A light bulb can go off of, how can we change that? Right? What are you saying to yourself? What's your narrative? How do you see yourself? What's your self-talk? What are you saying to yourself? And someone who may, they're in the car sitting at a red light, or they're in the shower, and they might just think, what did you think 6 months ago? They might think, I don't know, I'll think about football, or I'll, think about a movie, or I'll think about a person, or, okay, that sounds great. What are you thinking now? And they're just thinking, nothing's ever going to go right, or what happened to me, right? This happens a lot where there's such a change in self-talk, and then we wonder why we're feeling worse. So just bringing that kind of compassionate curiosity, what do you say to yourself in quiet moments? What's that like? And then is it the same as it was before? Is it different? How's that been across time? It's amazing how much good can come of just that.
I think a lot of it has to do with the assumption that we make that those kinds of thoughts are true, that we don't question them. If you get a thought in your head that's sort of holding you to account and going tut-tutting, we assume it's true what that thought is saying. And there's a lovely phrase in your book that really jumped out, and it was, don't confuse being harsh with being honest.
Right.
So we assume that harsh voice is an honest voice that's kind of cutting through the crap and saying, hey, this is where you're messing up. You need to listen. I love that phrase. Don't confuse being harsh with being honest.
Right. Because oftentimes I think that voice isn't just saying, hey, this is where you're messing up. That voice is saying, you're an idiot, right? What's wrong with you, right? It's saying things that are much harsher. And we don't realize that voice is not authentic. And an example I give, and I use this example a lot because I think it's so tragic and so avoidable in response to your question, is of a young woman who really life was difficult where she came from. Not a lot was expected of her and of others. It was a difficult place, but she had really excelled in school and she'd done very, very well. And she'd won an award in her last year of high school. And the award was designed to say, hey, you're getting this award because like you're a person who can really make a difference in the world. And, like you're smart and you're engaged. So the award was it was saying something to her that said, you can go out there in the world and no one's telling you how far you can go or who you can be. And she really and truly thought of it that way. Then very bad trauma happened to her. Not that far down the road. And she had a very different view of the award. The view then became a mockery. It was saying to her, "Oh, here's something that tells you you can go somewhere else, make something better for your life." But it's just mocking you because of course you can't. You're not going to get anywhere. You're not getting out of here. She was saying this to herself, and she saw the award as a mockery, the opposite of what she saw it as before, and had no recollection that she had seen it differently. And that's not just her. That is true in all of us. If you asked her with complete honesty, she would have told you, "I always saw it that way." Because our reactions to guilt and shame and fear, right, they start telling us a different narrative and a different story of self, right, also tell us that it's true. Think about it. That's very dangerous. And unless we look at ourselves with compassionate curiosity, we don't know the difference. And the truth and the tragedy of that story is that young woman is not alive anymore. I think that's where that went. That if we don't understand the difference, I've seen, it's tragic but true. People ask at times, where does that all go? And often it's misery and death. Or it's at least it's not a person who could have been happier, could be happier, could have the generative drive more at the forefront of their life, build within them empowerment and agency and humility and gratitude in life. These are hallmark words in my book and in my approach to life. Life doesn't go as well as it could have, but the other side of that is often it goes in ways that are tragic. And it doesn't have to be that way, but we have to understand this, that the response of negativity in us is also accompanied very, very often by the idea that that's how it's always been. So someone who's beating up on themselves and telling themselves they're incapable and they'll never get anywhere also has within them the thought that, like, that's just the truth and it's always been that way.
I like how you talk about that life narrative in the book. I found that really interesting. I found it very hopeful. Yes, our negative stories in our minds can change that life narrative to the point where we see our lives differently to maybe how other people see our life. I heard a great example of this on another podcast I was listening to, where a woman was very sad and down on herself about where her life had gone. She was in her 60s and she was talking about her youth, and she was saying, nothing ever worked out. I always feel like I got second best. And she spoke about her career as a model when she was younger. She was very tall and good looking, and she had a career as a model, but it didn't quite reach the heights she had hoped. So she stopped, and she had traveled a lot and lived in other countries, but found that she was unable to sustain that. So eventually she moved home. And to her, this was a whole list of reasons to show that she finished second best. But when I was listening, I was like, wow, she got to be a model. She got to work as a model,
Right.
not all her life, but that was pretty cool,
Right.
and she got to work and live abroad, which is more than most people do. So that's a really cool life experience. And then she brought that experience back, so
Yes.
it was interesting
Yes.
just to me, when I saw your life narrative, I was like, wow, that's exactly what I experienced listening to that woman. Sometimes it's easier for people on the outside to see maybe a quirk in her own life narrative. I'm conscious
Absolutely.
of the time. I want to bring this to an end, and I really appreciate you talking to me. I've one question for you to finish on, and maybe it's a tricky one for you. But I was zooming out from your 3 drives thesis in the book, and I was, rather than taking it from a personal level, I was zooming out into the world, as if the world had its own big personality, which I guess in some ways it does. How would you see the world right now? Are the 3 drives balanced, do you think? The assertion, pleasure, and generative? And if so, is there hope, or is everything way out of whack?
Right. I'm so glad you asked that question. And I have a strong answer to it, that these phenomena that we see in ourselves as individual human beings, we can also see in sociological and cultural ways. So yes, we can map this to the world around us. It's different, it's complicated in different ways, but it's interesting, and it fits. That there's aggression and assertion, because this is what humans are doing. This is what groups of humans are doing, right? All the way up from family units through nations. Right. So yes, we can become out of balance. And we are so dramatically out of balance. Just because I'm coming at the world through a view that is not cynical does not mean that I'm Pollyanna, right? We're not in a great place in the world. And the mental health of us as a population is not in a great place. And yes, we need to do something about that. And we can do something about that. We are not governed by a generative drive. Right? It's very, very easy to destroy. It's easy to destroy buildings. It takes a long time to build them and a very short time to destroy them. The same is true with a person having a strong sense of self or a sense of safety in the world or a sense of not being terrified. It can be hard to build those things. It's easy to take them away. And we're accepting so much destruction in the world around us. And then when that happens, we often come into a mindset of conflict. And then we ignore things that are important. How much, certainly in the United States, are we ignoring our infrastructure? Right? Because, bridges, for example, highways, these aren't the sexy things, right? This isn't, we're talking about war, right? So we tend to ignore those things, right? And we say, well, we're looking at other things that are more important. They're not more important. We're just arguing or fighting or spinning our wheels or wasting energy or being destructive. And what we really should do is repair that bridge. Because if that bridge falls down, people are going to die. Right? It's big, it's serious, but what we do is we neglect what's so important close to home, and then we get lost in assertion being out of balance and pleasure being out of balance. And I would argue, just as that can be and is the case in individual humans, right? Not all the time, of course, but there are individual humans where that happens, that happens on cultural levels, and it's happening to us now, I think, on the level of a global society.
That's a lovely answer. I hope that maybe to continue your car analogy, that some of our global leaders notice the dashboard warning lights and don't wait till literally the wheels come off.
Right. Well, to say very quickly, I'm a little worried it may not be that global leaders see that. I hope so. But what needs to happen is individual people say this isn't okay. Right? That there's another way of coming at that too, which is the people who are behind the leaders. And again, not being political, like this is me saying, hey, this is how this works. Then individual people can say, I don't want to be handling my life that way. You don't want to be handling your life that way. Maybe you and I were in conflict before. Now we don't have to be. Right? We don't have to be, whether that's over the internet, we're saying nasty things to each other because we have different beliefs. Like we can say, I'm going to take it upon myself to not be destructive. So I do think things can change, and it can be top down, but it can also be bottom up if we're taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, well, hopefully your book will help nudge us in the correct direction. What's Going Right is the book.
Thank you.
Dr. Paul Conti, thank you so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it. And
You're welcome. You're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.